It's Friday and you're watching FreightWaves Now. I'm your host Anthony Smith, and coming up we have the lovely Donny Gilbert back talking to the brokers. We also have the man himself, Kevin Hale, with the DHL Supply Chain Pricing Power Index update. But first we're going to go to Zach Strickland with the carrier update brought to you by PowerFleet. Stay tuned.
Hey everyone, and welcome to your carrier update presented by PowerFleet. I'm Zach Strickland, and we're watching the market in free fall. Capacity itself dropped off the map. The outbound tender rejection index below 6% for the first time since way back when, all the way back here around November or so, early November, before we hit the peak season where freight and capacity are at their highest. So, see this big old stump right here? Peak season, and we fell for a while, and then we kind of leveled out in the middle of the month. Now we've re-entered this free fall situation. If you look all the way back in 2019 when we were starting this year, we're looking for year-over-year changes here. You can see that the market did the same thing somewhat, stalled out a little bit, fell for another little bit before entering February before it flattened out. This does not look the exact same. This looks like something that's going to continue to fall here over the next few weeks. So what does that mean for carriers in general? Well, it simply means that you need to make sure that you accept as much of this freight as possible at this point in time. Not that I needed to tell you that, it's January, but we're not going to see the market make any notable change in pattern just yet, especially with lack of volatility this time of year. So what this is the weighted rejection index pulled up behind me on the the nationwide thing. So I want to point out something about this map. So it is a heat map. So it's a relative scale that you're looking at here. So just because something's blue doesn't mean that you're seeing increasing levels of tender rejection activity, capacity tightening, etc. No, look down here at the bottom. That's a 1 at the highest thing. If you've heard me on here before, that means a 1 in the weighted rejection index is not tightening at all. It's basically a flat figure. You have to get up around 5 and above to have any significant change in spot market activity or capacity tightening. Some of the smaller markets you might get away with a 3 or above, but for the most part, anything 1 and under, it's a flat market, softening market conditions, which is reflected in the national outbound tender rejection index. Looking across the country, some of the tighter markets, such as Pittsburgh, again, I say tighter in a relative way. It's not necessarily that you're going to see a bunch of available loads on the spot market up there. It just means that you might be able to hold that region steady if you are getting getting loads offered to you over the spot market. Ontario, California, fallen off the map. That is our weakest market of the day. If you see over here, this is sorted by the lowest value of weighted rejection index, negative 10.4. This market is collapsing. Now, volumes are not the cause for this market falling off the map. They're simply staying relatively flat right now. They fell down roughly about less than 1% yesterday, not a strong change in volume. So capacity is just simply being more prevalent. And you have the mid-haul rejection index leading the way, but all of them are in red. That means day over day, they all fell down. And every one of them, except for the mid-haul rejection index, under 5%, very soft market in Ontario, which will become increasingly important throughout the next couple of weeks or so, especially with the Chinese New Year impact scheduled to hit sometime around end of February, and that coronavirus is supposed to have a deepening impact on that freight volume out of that market. So LA returns to what it was every other winter before 2018, if we're going to make a relative comparison there. So Pittsburgh, if you saw this was the highest value of the weighted rejection index over the last day or so, and we do see an increasing amount of tender rejection spiking here. This is a much more volatile market, much smaller market than the Ontario market. So tender rejection rates are on the rise here, both reefer and dry van tender rejections shooting up there, all lengths of haul. So this market itself is in need of a little bit of help. So you might actually see a little bit of increased spot market activity out of the Pittsburgh market over the next few days. So if you are headed in there, make sure you do have a pre-plan, however. So that'll do it for this week, or this carrier update for Friday.
The comprehensive logistics offerings from PowerFleet cover in-cab ELD, fleet management, trailer tracking, cargo monitoring, and tracking other assets such as chassis and intermodal containers. Power up your operations with PowerFleet.
Thank you, Zach, for that wonderful update. Today for the broker update, we're going to start off by looking at what's going on currently right now with tender rejection rates for the dry van and the reefer. And I'm going to throw it up here on a chart here to kind of just to give a real we can really see what's really going on with these charts because it really shows what's happened here in the past few days. Here we see both the blue line and the green line. The blue line is drive-in tender rejection rates, and the green is reefer. And here over these past few days, we see a sharp decline on both tender rejection rates, which really shows how soft this market has become right now. It's kind of a bit, it happened a lot sooner than what we anticipated. So here, just looking at it, we see here that drive-in tender rejection rates have dropped to 5.28%, which is in that range of its averaging, right now across the U.S. Your average drive-in load is right in the range of your normal contracted rates. Our reefers are at 13.16%, which is still elevated, but you see reefer here is what's really taking the dive right now. Both drive-in and reefer rejection rates, tender rejection rates are on the down, showing that spot market rates for both these are currently moving downward. So right now, if you're a broker, it's probably a lot easier right now to push down rates when you book these loads with your carriers because they're getting used to day by day the rates are going down. Now, today's Friday. What we really want to book on a Friday is we're really looking for long haul loads for Friday. Something that's going to cover the miles for a driver for at least 1,000, 1,500 miles. So he has miles to cover all weekend. I brought you a map here today, and these are our long haul tender rejection rates. And I've doubled that on top of our tender volumes for each market. Now, what we're looking for is we want to find a darker blue market that has a lot of elevation to it. And as you look across this map, you're not really finding any markets that are dark blue with a lot of volume to them right now. And that's because the market's really soft right now. We do see some lighter shades of blue with some volume here. Salt Lake City, up in Oregon, maybe across the Midwest here a little bit, but right now it's really tough. We see Atlanta, it's a whiter shade with a lot of depth, so it's got a lot of volumes, but tender rejection rates are really down. So once again, looking across this, we really see how soft the markets are. And right now, if you're looking for long haul loads right now, the rates are really soft. So I want to bring this up in a tree map to where we kind of really look at it and go and look at, if you look up here in the top left-hand corner, we really see our markets with the larger tender rejection rates. But if you take a close look at these markets, they're actually kind of remote markets. We got Bismarck, North Dakota, Fargo, North Dakota, Des Moines, Iowa. These are markets that are, really north in the Midwest, and these are markets that a lot of people don't really operate in as much. So this is a tough map right here to really show. We do see a few markets though, here, Little Rock, Arkansas, Portland, Oregon. These are markets, Terre Haute, Indiana, that you might target. So besides those, since the markets aren't there with a lot of volumes, there's kind of a couple other different things that you actually need to look at. And for one is take a look at these markets that are in red. And it's kind of important to know that since they're in red right now, what's happening is the markets are actually declining in your spot market rates. So these are markets that I really look at, the ones in the red going across this map, and try to book loads out of those and push your carrier rates down. And that's what's going to create the margin. You're going to have to push the carrier rates down for you to have margins on these loads. But since the actual spot rates are already in decline, it's going to be a lot easier to push those rates down instead of a market that's either flat or increasing, obviously. On the other hand, I've kind of zoomed in to the bottom right-hand corner, so it's a little bit blurry because I've zoomed in. These are markets right here that have a tender rejection rate of about 4% or less. And what that tells us is the spot market rates in these markets are either kind of right at your contracted rates or below your contracted rates. So look at these markets real closely and see if you have any contracted rates with your shippers in these markets. And the reason why is you can accept these loads at contracted rates and probably go in and push carrier rates down because spot market rates are below contracted and make some margin there. So you got two options: take the markets that have a declining spot market rate, push your carriers down, or grab these markets that are below 3% and book your loads out of those markets.
Make sure to tune in to FreightWaves TV this Friday as we discuss the current and future state of freight. The FreightWaves research team has compiled the 2020 FreightWaves Freight Outlook, designed to give you an upper hand in an ever-changing industry. You'll hear in-depth analysis from FreightWaves CEO and founder Craig Fuller, head of research Kevin Hill, and so many more of our freight market experts. We'll also be taking live calls with any questions you may have for 2020. Tune in to the FreightWaves 2020 Freight Outlook this Friday at 2 p.m. following What the Truck.
I'm here with the man himself, Kevin Hill. Kevin, what do you have for us today?
Well, Anthony, we have the DHL Supply Chain Pricing Power Index like we do every week.
Yes, sir.
And this week we went from 35 to 30. And as a refresher, the closer we get to 0, the shippers have the power. And the closer we get to 100, then the carriers have the power. So we're falling down. We're up to 45 during peak holiday season back in December, and over January we have just sliding back.
Right.
And that's really for 3 or 4 main reasons. Number one, our load volumes are pretty flat year over year.
Right.
OTRI, or outbound tender rejections, have fallen from their peaks of about 14%. They were kind of leveled off at 7-8%, but now they're under 6% as of today.
Gotcha.
That's driven spot market rates down, though they're down to about $1.40 for dry vans on national average. And then we have some pretty bleak guidance. Earnings season's coming out for Q4 2019,
right,
which was down year over year. But the market conditions that's been described in the outlook for Q1 of 2020 have been pretty bleak.
Okay.
There's companies that are operating on a daily basis that are about 18% lower on a margin basis year over year.
Gotcha.
In Q1. So I think there's about 5 or 6 companies, major companies that have reported so far, and every single one of them have been guiding much lower for Q1 2020, and that includes C.H. Robinson, Landstar, Knight Swift, you name them. They're tempering market expectations for Q1 2020.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So, Kevin, give me a lot of downer stuff right now.
This is a lot of
downers. Any positives?
There are positives. Refrigerator volumes are up 14% year over year. Van is pretty flat, but refrigerator is up 14%.
Okay.
And as Donny and Zach, I think, mentioned, the tender rejection rates are still around 14% for refrigerator freight. So that seasonal aspect of the refrigerator cycle is still going strong,
okay,
much better than last year. So that's a glimmer of hope. Macro GDP came out.
Yes, that's right.
And what was it, 2.1 or 2.3?
2.1 for the compared to third quarter to fourth quarter, and I think 2.3 for the year overall.
For the year overall,
right,
so 2.3%. So nice, steady GDP growth.
Yeah.
Nothing fantastic, but really nice and steady. So that's a big positive, and we're seeing like insurance premiums jump up. We're seeing a lot of bad news for carriers.
Yeah.
But that should get the excess capacity out of the market, and I think that's really where we're all hung up right
Gotcha.
now.
And one of the really big areas that's been a source of weakness, going back to those downers,
yeah,
has been from the manufacturing side. And I think we saw some of that in the most recent GDP number, right, where we saw investments into non-residential structures and equipment. And so does that factor into this at all?
It does, construction is big.
Right, right.
Construction, manufacturing, industrial, but construction is a big thing, especially once we get into the warm construction season.
Right.
So I think we'll start seeing green shoots in the spring.
Okay.
Green grass coming up. It's not going to be great, but I think it's going to be better than certainly the Q1 doldrums or 2019, and then perhaps a second half recovery.
Okay.
I know that's the word of the year for everyone, is the second half recovery, but I think it's lining up to happen.
Gotcha.
Finally.
Gotcha. So a lot of down news right now, small little arrows of brightness here and there. But Kevin Hill, thank you so much for that update. And thank you so much for tuning in for this edition of the DHL Supply Chain Pricing Power Index. We'll be sure to keep you up to date. Tune in next week. And that's going to do it for this Friday edition of FreightWaves Now. Thank you so much for tuning in. We're always posting around the clock, so check us out on all your favorite social media platforms as well. And if you haven't already, check out our FreightWaves TV app, available on all your favorite streaming platforms, including Apple TV. And for all my fellow Android users, we have you covered there as well. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next episode.